Good day, my name is Brett Gilchrist. I'll be presenting on behalf of Adam Burns of Fisheries and Oceans Canada on our fisheries management measures to protect North Atlantic right whale for the 2020 season. During this presentation, I'll touch on an update on issues such as detections, measures, mortalities, and entanglements, and we'll be providing a brief update on our preparations for the 2020 approach. Our first detection in 2020 occurred on May 3rd. We've had consistent detections throughout the Gulf of St. Lawrence since then, as well as the Bay of Fundy, Roseway Basin, and some unique detections this year, such as detections near our Saguenay St. Lawrence Marine Park. As of October 13th, the recording of this presentation, we've continued to have detections in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, although at a lower rate. It should be noted that our targeted monitoring efforts in the Gulf of St. Lawrence for right whale comes to an end on November 15th, resuming in the spring of next year. However, wherever we have fisheries, we do have aerial and at-sea surveillance, and that surveillance program also monitors for right whales, and any detection would lead to a management measure in that area. The slide demonstrates two things. One, you'll see a series of shaded gray polygons in 2017, 2018, and 2019, in addition to the two orange polygons representing the critical habitat areas. These polygons represent where our single sighting, single detection closure protocol is applied in previous years. This closure protocol has been expanded in 2020, as you see in the map for 2020, throughout the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Bay of Fundy. I'll be touching on that management measure later on. The other key point of this slide you'll see is a drop in detections from 2019 to 2020. This is based on the absence of the NOAA survey in Canadian waters. The NOAA survey focusing largely on individual identification, so counting individuals and identifying individuals and aggregations. The focus of the surveillance efforts for Canada is, or at the very least from a fisheries management perspective, is to identify as many whales in as many areas as possible in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. Because our area closure protocols only requires a single detection, we don't spend as much time as the NOAA survey in counting individuals in aggregations. We try to distribute our resources as much as possible, in particular after areas have been closed, so that we're capturing whales in other areas and where fisheries may occur to avoid or to help prevent entanglement risk. This slide demonstrates progression throughout the summer of detections in Canadian waters. It's similar to what we had in previous years in that the detections started in the central Gulf of St. Lawrence later in the season, aggregating close to the Gaspé Peninsula and the Shediac Valley area, and then distributing more thoroughly throughout the Gulf of St. Lawrence later in the season. It should be noted that there is a clear bias in our detections, as noted. Our focus from a fisheries management surveillance perspective in protecting right whales is to focus on areas where there's an overlap between fisheries and potential right whale presence. This slide again shows you the expansion of our management approach throughout the Gulf of St. Lawrence for our dynamic closure protocol, or our temporary closure protocol. So all the areas you see shaded in gray, including the two critical habitat areas, is where our dynamic closure protocol is applied. A single whale detected leads to a 15-day closure. If no whale is detected in that 15-day period, it is reopened, with the exception of another new tool we have this year in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In previous years, we've had a static closure protocol, so a static closure throughout the season close to the Shediac Valley area in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. That's been replaced in the Gulf of St. Lawrence with the new seasonal closure protocol, where a second detection in the initial 15-day temporary closure will trigger a season-long closure throughout the season to November 15th. This will be demonstrated in a later slide. Other 2020 management measures announced by the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canada in February include new gear marking requirements for all non-tended fixed gear fisheries, including lobster and crab in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. This was mentioned in previous years by the Minister, but it is now a requirement for fisheries. Ongoing requirements to minimize the amount of vertical and floating rope in the water, and the Minister has also announced requirements at the end of 2021 for weak breaking points in vertical lines for fixed gear fisheries in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, as well as plans for requirements for sinking ground lines and maximum rope diameter, which I'll touch on in later slides. This is a This slide is an animation of our right whale closure protocol, the temporary and seasonal closure protocol. Please ignore the dark shaded blue. It has to be redrafted as it overlaps with U.S. waters in this case. So you'll see the red grid boxes appear, and then after a period, they're reopened. That's our temporary closure protocol, and the black grid box representing our seasonal closure protocol, where the grids close and remain in place until November 15th. This slide represents what you would see on DFO's daily update for fisheries management measures and whale detections on our webpage. It also shows the period between the detection of right whales and when grid boxes are closed, represented by the grid boxes with red lines. That represents the 48-hour timeline harvesters have to remove their gear once a right whale is detected in an area. That 48-hour period is a minimum. There is some adjustments allowed for safety issues and weather conditions. As a note, as of October 7th, our seasonal closure protocol was approximately 32,000 square kilometers. This slide represents some of our surveillance assets throughout the season. The DFO science assets, the two Cessnas, and the Twin Otter, which is managed by DFO and DFO Resource Management and DFO Science. This again provides some information on flight patterns for our assets throughout the season. It does not represent all of our assets. The DFO Conservation and Protection surveillance planes are not represented here, so they would add an additional layer of this. You can see these flight patterns on the whale map managed by Dalhousie University, with the exception of our conservation protection flight plans. As of October 5th, DFO had spent 1,836 hours conducting aerial surveillance for right whales. This slide demonstrates our acoustic Viking buoy detection tool that has been applied this year. In previous years, we relied only on visual detections to trigger fisheries management measures to protect right whales. This year, we are also using acoustic detections, so our Viking buoy detections will lead to closures of both the temporary closure and the seasonal closure throughout Atlantic Canada and Quebec. It does not, the acoustic devices are not used to reopen areas. That still requires two flights, so the absence of an acoustic detection does not allow an area to reopen. What is not represented here are gliders the gliders managed by the University of New Brunswick and Kim Davies' shop, which we also used to trigger management measures. We have had no reported mortalities or entanglements in Canadian waters as of the recording of this presentation on October 13th. This slide provides an overview of the species at risk documentation for right whale in Canada, including our SARA action plan, which recently underwent a public review period and is in the process of being redrafted. You can also see other products that are associated with our species at risk, including the progress report, and the species recovery strategy. This slide demonstrates another layer of protection we have in the form of spatial long-term protection. Some of the areas in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in blue represent areas where fixed gear fisheries are not allowed to operate. We're at the stage of the year where we're going to be preparing for a roundtable in November with the fishing industry, academics, our expert response partners, NGOs, and others to plan for 2021. We'll also continue engaging our U.S. partners. And as mentioned, we have a series of announcements by the Minister for gear modification requirements that come into play at the end of 2021 for reef points and gear, and also for maximum rope diameter and sinking ground lines. We will be continuing to engage our stakeholders, our harvesters, on how best to apply these measures, similar to the approach used by the U.S. through 2020 and 2021. Thank you.